all so much for joining us. This is the Spina Bifida Association's Spina Bifida University teleprogram. This is our first call. My name is Carmen Head. I'm the Director of Education and Support Services for SBA, and we are absolutely delighted to have you on the phone with us today. Our teleprogram coordinator is Ms. Sharon Sellett, who's on the line with us, and our speaker today, who will be talking about non-verbal learning disabilities, is Julie Yindra. So, Sharon, if you could provide an introduction for Julie, that would be fantastic.
I would be glad to. So, again, I think that we were supposed to have close to 25 people registered according to those names that Carmen gave me, and then also some other folks that may have registered. So what we would ask folks is if you could go to a quiet place or press *6 to mute your phone, and then when we have time for some questions, then press *6 again, and that will open your phone call so that you can ask questions. We have a mix of ages and geographical areas represented tonight. We also have adults and parents and some friends, so we're very excited about that. And when we do get to the point where we're asking for questions, if you could just say your name first, and that way we begin to create a little bit of community here. So we'll leave some time at the end for some parking lot if we have some questions that didn't get answered, and we'll wrap up maybe about 8:20. So do we have any questions from the group so far? It sounds nice and quiet out there, so that's good. Okay, so we're delighted to have Julie Yindra, the Director of Services for Students with Disabilities at Hofstra University in New York. And Julie is an adult with spina bifida and frequent presenter at the National Conference and a board member of the National SBA. And she just returned from Guatemala in the International Conference on SB. And we're hoping to hear something about that in our next conference call in July. So the topic tonight is planning for success for adults with nonverbal learning disabilities and spina bifida. So Julie.
Yes.
Good. So I'll start the first question off here. Would you be able to briefly describe what a nonverbal learning disability is and why it can cause so much chaos for folks?
Well, I can. You know, the topic of nonverbal learning disability is a large topic in and of itself, but what I'm going to do is just sort of give us a general idea of what this is and how it affects adolescents and adults with spina bifida in particular. But nonverbal learning disability is really a cluster of strengths and weaknesses, neurologically, cognitively, that can vary from person to person. But what we've noticed is that most people with spina bifida have some variation of this particular cluster of strengths and weaknesses. And what it looks like basically is this. A young person who has nonverbal learning disorder will appear initially to be very verbal, develop very early a high vocabulary, good oral speaking skills, good spelling skills, good reading skills, and so early on in school, in elementary school, this is a student who will do very well. But this particular learning disability also has with it some specific weaknesses and specific deficits. And one of those deficits is in the area of visual, spatial, organizational skills. The best way for me to kind of give a general idea of those particular skills would be someone who, and I'm using myself as an example, has difficulty with spatial orientation, understanding where I am and how to get from point A to point B. A good example is I was recently staying in a hotel, and A couple of times I had to talk to myself and say, okay, when I come out of the room, I'm going to take a right to go to the elevator. We tend to have difficulty with that spatial orientation. Where are we and how do we get back to where we came from? Another particular area of weakness is in the area of mathematics. Now, we're really good at memorizing things, at least initially. So if you give me math facts and say 3 times 3 is 9, generally speaking, early on I can do well with that because it's something that I can memorize and just regurgitate like from memory, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I understand what it means. And so as we advance in years, that mathematical sense, that understanding of what decimals and fractions and algebra actually means is particularly difficult for us because we can't visualize it. We can't see it. It has to be explained to us in words. So that's a particular area of weakness. Another area of weakness, and this is one that really sort of invades our success later on, is weakness in something called executive function. Executive function is that little voice in the back of my brain that tells me, first of all, whether what I'm doing is working, whether I'm heading in the right direction, whether I've given myself enough time to complete this particular task, the planning, the anticipation. For instance, a student in high school with an executive function difficulty might perfectly well intend to complete that history research paper, but be totally unable to anticipate with any accuracy how long it's going to take him to do the reading, do the research, do the outline, write the draft, and, get the assignment completed on time. So we have a very, very poor sense of planning and implementation. The other aspect of executive function that tends to get in our way is that we tend to do things in a way that is patterned, but we don't necessarily have the ability to recognize when what we're doing isn't efficient, when it isn't working. We'll do things over and over and over again exactly the same way, not recognizing that, hey, this isn't working, maybe I better do something else. A good example of this would be reading a textbook for a class. And you're sitting there and you're reading, and 3 hours goes by, and it hasn't occurred to you that it's not registering, and so you should do something different. Whereas most people would read and say, wait a minute, I'm not getting it. I need to go back and I need to do something else. The person with the nonverbal learning disorder will say, well, I studied for 3 hours, but I don't know why I didn't retain the material. It's because our study habits tend to be inefficient. So that's kind of a very basic and very general explanation of nonverbal learning disorder. And that's probably a good place for us to start. The other thing that sometimes, especially when we're young, will get in our way with the nonverbal learning disorder is we're great with words, but we're not so great with facial expressions and intonations and the ability to read from someone's tone or someone's pace what they actually mean. We tend to be pretty literal. So if someone says to us, get off the bus, we'll get off the bus. We don't understand that they're actually saying something that is coded, that is not intended to be literal, but we will take it literally. So we have difficulty with the nonverbal expression. A good example of that is I went to a conference a couple of years ago, and I met a young lady, and I introduced myself, and I said, hi, my name is Julie, and I have spina bifida, and she said her name, and then she continued to talk for 20 minutes because she couldn't read from my facial expressions or from my body language that it was time for her to pause and time for me to say something. So that's kind of the global picture of nonverbal learning disability. Now, everybody is different. Everybody has varying degrees of some of these deficits. I have known from time to time a person with spina bifida and nonverbal learning disability who will become an architect or a chemistry teacher or a math teacher or an engineer. But those kinds of careers are very rare for us because we tend to like those pursuits that involve words and language rather than abstract things and visual things. So does that give you a pretty good breakdown of what we're talking about?
Yes, this is Sharon, and yes, I think so. Is this a good time to ask if we have any questions?
Yes, that is good. Does anybody have any questions so far?
Yeah, my name is Brian. I'm from Dallas.
Hi, Brian.
Hi. I was wondering about, I'm a young gentleman with spina bifida. And when you're talking about communication skills, does that also go
Your host is
along
exiting the
with
conference. This conference will continue for 15 minutes.
Does it also go for like reading and writing? I mean, does that have anything to do with communication? And how does that tie in?
That's an excellent question. Because it does have something to do with reading and writing. What I can tell you is that while we tend to be folks who are very verbal and have very high vocabularies, when it comes to writing, sometimes we have a great deal of difficulty organizing our thoughts. We kind of fill everything out onto the table without taking the time to say, wait a minute, okay, this idea should come first, and this idea should come second, and this idea should come third. And so, although we tend to be verbal, we do have difficulty when it comes to writing something formal because we have sequencing problems. And we tend to just want to sort of get it all out, and it will come out as kind of a disorganized mishmash. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Does that sound familiar?
For me, yes.
So what do you do about that? What do you do to kind of take all those thoughts and ideas and say, okay, how can I communicate more effectively? What do you do?
That I really don't know, and that's kind of why I am on this call. So hopefully get some ideas of how I can deal with it and how I can facilitate with that.
Well, I hope that I'll be able to give you some answers to some of that. So
do I.
I will keep that question in mind as we go through this process and through the call, and I'll try to respond to that in particular because, I mean, what we have to do is we have to learn to be able to use our strengths and our assets to our greatest advantage. And sometimes that's challenging. But one thing I can tell you is nothing that I have ever written has ever gone out raw. Like, I'm not a person who will write a lengthy, complicated email and then just press send. You know what I mean? I always write something in a Word document and play with it and correct it and revise it and organize it before I put it into an email and hit send. Because I know that if I just say what comes across my mind, it makes sense to me, but it may not be sequential and organized and articulate to someone else who's reading it. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, Sharon.
Yes. This is Sharon, and I hear a dog barking someplace, and I'm wondering if who's ever on the call, if there's a dog someplace around, if you might press star mute, because we can hear him talking. Okay.
And he sounds cute, but
he does sound cute, but we don't understand the question.
It might be me. Can you hear me?
I can hear a very soft voice.
It might be me. I'm not sure.
Okay. Well,
I tried.
I don't know who.
I tried muting it, and it won't mute.
Star mute or star 6?
Star mute. How do you unmute it if I wanted to say something?
okay, go ahead.
Thanks.
Mute it.
Go ahead.
Hello.
Yes.
Yes, we hear you.
I was going to ask a question.
Okay.
My name's Dawn. I'm from
Hi, Dawn. Where are you from?
Wilmington, Ohio.
Okay. What can I do for you?
I have listened to your conversation, and I noticed as I was going through school and growing up, I had a lot of trouble with math. I struggled my whole life with math, and I still notice that I'm struggling with math. And now my daughter's in school, and I feel like I have to relearn things all over again.
Right.
And
I think, how old are you?
I'm 32.
Okay. So there is good news and bad news. The bad news is most of us will never become mathematicians. And
that one.
and I came from a family of I'm a 48-year-old adult with spina bifida, and I came from a family of people that were mathematicians and computer scientists. And so I definitely was the black sheep in my family. I can remember when I was in high school struggling with algebra and sitting at the kitchen table with all the papers spread out and the books spread out trying to do my homework, and I just didn't get it. And my mother came home from work, and she looked over my shoulder and said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm trying to do my algebra homework." And she said, "Well, I can help you." Because, to my mother, my father, and my brother, it was second nature. And my mother looked at the book, and she looked at the notebook, and she looked at me, and then she looked back at the notebook, and then she looked at me again, and she said, "I can't help you because I don't understand how it's possible that you don't understand it." Because some people's minds just operate with an abstract ability that we tend to really have difficulty with. So, to a certain extent, it's just something that we have to live with. But on the other hand, I can tell you that through practice and learning, I have gotten better at those kinds of skills. I can remember when I was in graduate school, the worst nightmare of my entire life was I was doing great in graduate school, and I went to see my advisor, and she said, "Oh, you have to take statistics next semester." And I thought I was going to pass out because I was like, there's no way I'm going to get through that class. And I did go to the class, and it was difficult, and I did hire a tutor, but the tutor got me through it, and what I began to realize is that as I practiced and as my brain continued to develop and as I worked at it, some of what used to really not make sense to me began to make sense. So some things will improve over time with practice. But, I was going to go, when I was a kid, I was going to go to medical school and I was going to be a doctor until I discovered, algebra and chemistry. I was like, well, maybe that won't work. So maybe I better make another plan. So some of it will get better. But, some of it is just going to be something that you're always going to have some difficulty with. And calculators and other assistive technology are great things for those of us who don't quite have that. You know, the rest of my family can calculate mortgage rates and things like that in their head, and I have to do it on paper, and, you know, that's okay. I've just learned to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Okay, who's next? All right, so I don't think we have any...
Knoxville.
Pardon?
My name's Virgil from Knoxville.
Hi, Virgil. Welcome to the call. What's your question?
I was wondering, on the learning disability part, is there any programs out there to help people with spina bifida with the learning disability?
Well,
any type of programs or anything like that?
Well, you know, there are a lot of avenues to pursue. First of all, how old are you, and are you in school? Are you working? What is your situation?
I'm 38 years old, and I'm not working at this moment. I was working with the Disability Resource Center here in Knoxville.
Mm-hmm.
But I realized over the years the only thing that's been holding me back is my learning disability. Physically, I can do a lot, but I realized, and I have been realizing this a lot lately, my learning disability has stopped me from doing a lot in life. And working at the Disability Resource Center, it was very difficult working in that type of environment. But I like working with people and doing things like that, but it was kind of hard with my learning disability. And I just was wondering what type of advice would you give me when I want to go into that type of field.
Well, I think if I were you, one of the things that I would do is I would look at what is it that I want to do. Is there a degree that I need to obtain that is going to lead to the career that I want? Is there a course of study that's going to, lead to the degree that I want? And then look at that and say, what do I have to do to get to that point, to get from A to B? So, Virgil, what is it that you think that you would like to do that you're not doing right now?
I like working with people, like with support groups and speaking engagements. I've been doing a lot of things like that, but just telling about my life with being a person with spina bifida. And I like doing stuff like that. It's just writing speeches and stuff like that, that's very difficult.
Right. Well, it sounds like you are at a point in your life where it's probably going to be advantageous for you to look at some. Now, tell me, what is your education level? What's the highest level of education that you have achieved?
I did go through high school, but I graduated with a resource diploma. But after that, I didn't pursue any other type of educational. Okay. I have went through like vocational stuff, but that was like for job placement. It wasn't for the educational part.
Right. So have you been a client of vocational rehabilitation?
Yes, I have.
So what you need to do, if you haven't already done it, is you need to ask them to do a complete psychoeducational assessment so that you can determine what exactly is the extent of your learning disability and what are your academic strengths and weaknesses. Because, they'll just focus on vocational placement, but if you ask them and you tell them that I want to pursue higher education, because it sounds to me like some of the things that you would be interested in doing are going to require some additional education. So you should go to Voc Rehab and say, I want to go to college. So I need to have an evaluation that's going to tell me what are my particular cognitive and academic strengths and weaknesses. And then when you go to college, you know, there are, at every college, there are services and programs to support students with learning disabilities. So then the next thing is to go to your local community college and find out, you know, I have spina bifida and I have learning disabilities. What are the support services that you can offer to me?
Okay.
If I were to become a student. So if I were you, Virgil, those are the next steps that I would take.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else?
Hey, yeah, this is Brian.
Hi, Brian.
I don't know if you can hear me.
I can hear you.
I was just listening to this young man and his story.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if anybody knows what DARS is. It's Department of Assistive and Rehabilitative Services.
Mm-hmm.
And we have it here in Texas. And I don't know if he has it where he's at. But if he does, I might suggest going there and talking with them, because I went through this in high school. I was hooked up with that department, and they helped me get my job. And I, too, have a learning disability. Might not be as bad as his. But they helped me get a job that I have currently through this DARS, and then also going to a place called Work Ready.
Mm-hmm.
And they're a great service to go into.
I think every state has some sort of agency that can be of assistance. I think the critical issue to take away from this is that just because you have learning disabilities does not necessarily mean that higher education or some kind of educational training beyond high school is not for you. I mean, you know, there are community colleges and colleges everywhere that, you know, will accommodate students with learning disabilities, and I think what it requires is looking into what is available in my local community, and if, you know, if I have dreams of becoming this or that, absolutely don't think that because you have disabilities that higher education is not possible, because it definitely is, and I'm, a perfect testament to that. I couldn't do math to save my life, but I managed to major in English and get through a bachelor's degree and then go to graduate school, and some things got better and better and better as I went along, but I think the most important thing is don't think that there are not possibilities out there for you. If you have something that you would like to do, go and pursue it and find out from your local college or community college what is available to support me. All right. Any other questions before we move on?
My name is Dave, and I'm out in Washington State.
My goodness, you're a long ways away. I'm in New York.
Yeah, I actually grew up in Buffalo, New York. So.
Oh, did you? So how are things in Washington?
Sunny.
So what can I do
live in
for
the
you?
desert, so. Well, I actually when I went to college, I actually had a learning disability that affected my ability to read.
Mm-hmm.
And even though I I knew how to read and everything like that, but the thing is that I had seizures, and the seizures affected my ability. So that's one thing that I was able to learn through time, was how to look into different services, whether it was the disability student services or just whatever it was, and I was able to get people to read for me, and eventually I was able to gain the skills necessary for any type of concentration.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that took several years to learn, but I was able to do it and eventually get my bachelor's degree in social work.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, another important lesson is that for some of us, some of these pursuits will take longer than the traditional time. Some of us just aren't ready and just aren't, cognitively matured at the traditional age that some folks go off to college after high school. But I think if we go about it saying, this is my plan, this is my goal, we can achieve. We just have to be very proactive and very good at figuring out, I might have to do this a little bit differently. And in your case, you knew that the seizure issue was causing you problems with reading comprehension, so you found other ways to get through that. And I think that's part of what we have to do is figure out, there's more than one way to do something. And what we have to do is we have to figure out what's my best way of getting from point A to point B.
Yes. It's also definitely. It's also very important to realize that a lot of times, maybe not all of the time, but a lot of times the necessary resources are a lot closer than you think, whether it's family or whoever. So
right. Absolutely. I mean, that brings me to another important point that I wanted to make. When I was young, and I think part of this was the nonverbal learning disability sort of part of my personality. I never wanted to take time to plan things or anticipate things. I just wanted to kind of go through the day and just dive in. We have a tendency to just not think about something, just say, yeah, I want to do that, and be very impulsive and kind of dive in. And I can remember over and over again when I was young, my mother's favorite phrase was, let's make a plan. And that used to make me crazy. It used to drive me nuts. Let's make a plan. Oh, God, my mother's wanting me to sit down and talk about things again and figure out what I'm going to do and how I'm going to do it. And I hate that. But the funny thing is that now that's how I do everything. And I've realized that she was absolutely right, that for the key for me in my career and in my educational pursuits has been learning how to anticipate problems and how to sit down and say, okay, tomorrow I'm going to have to do this. So if I'm going to have to do this, I got to figure out how I'm going to get there, when I'm going to get there. I have to go early because I'm going to get lost, because I always get lost. So I just sort of automatically do this mental run-through now of my day and my week and my semester and my year. I do this self-talking and I prep myself and I plan, and I perpetually leave to go places early because I just know that I'm going to get lost. And to me, one of the greatest inventions on the face of the earth is a GPS. Because I do drive, but I can't find my way out of a paper bag. So I have to think to myself, okay, tomorrow I have to go here. How am I going to do that? How long is it going to take me? And then I have to add on an extra half hour or an extra hour because I know for a fact that I'm going to get lost. And so, yes.
This is Sharon. And for some of the parents that might be on the call tonight, if you could go back and talk just briefly about when your mother may have started that and when you had the aha moment about what actually that meant to you and where you were in your life, that making a plan and anticipating and planning really played out for you. I think that's an important aspect.
Well, that's a really, really good thought. That's a really good question, because I can tell you that my mother was wanting me to talk things through and wanting me to sit down and say, okay, this didn't work well. This didn't go well. Let's talk about how you can do this differently the next time. And I can remember her always doing that. I wasn't always responsive, but let me tell you when it all started to kick in. The black hole in my life, I went through high school, I went to college, I had some bumps and I had some blips in college, but I got through college. But what I didn't do, because I was independent, I was living on my own, I was away at college, what I didn't do was I didn't start figuring out what am I going to do when I'm done with college? Where am I going to go? Where am I going to live? Where am I going to work? What am I going to do? I didn't engage in any of that because Mom was in Connecticut and I was in North Carolina, and I just said, well, I can do it myself. I can figure it out. And I had this gigantic hole after college that I sort of fell into of where am I going to live? What am I going to do for a living? How am I going to pay the bills? And I had this, it was like a year of, well, let's start over. And it was at that point that I began to realize that what my mother had been trying to do was to prepare me for the independent living. I mean, that year after college, I made every mistake in the book. I bounced checks because I couldn't add, effectively. I moved from place to place. I wasn't able to maintain a checkbook and pay the rent and maintain a job. I was working sort of odd jobs here and there because I hadn't really given any thought to, what do I want to do with the rest of my life. So I was kind of working odd jobs. I spent 3 months as an insurance agent and 3 months working in a restaurant, and I did all these kind of weird things before I sat down and thought, what do I want to be? But it was that year after college. But I'll tell you what made the difference, Sharon, is that I had issues. I had, bills that didn't get paid. I had financial problems. I had, all sorts of issues that came about. My parents were there, and they were available to help me, but they didn't fly down to North Carolina and swoop in and save me and fix everything. They let me sort of fall over and make mistakes and then have to get up and say, oops, I messed up. How am I going to fix this? So I think that was the aha moment when I realized that I was the adult and I was responsible and I needed to figure out, the way that I was operating my life wasn't working, and I needed to be able to figure out how am I going to do this differently so that it works. And it was that year after college that things really fell apart, but then came back together. Because the other thing that I learned from that experience of falling over and making all sorts of mistakes was I learned how to get up and start over. And that was an extremely valuable lesson. I talk a lot to parents of children with spina bifida, and they ask me, what can I do to help my child? What can I do to help my child? What can I do to prevent failure? And my answer is always the same. Don't prevent failure. Let them fall. Because until my parents allowed me to make mistakes, I didn't learn how to problem solve. And I had to learn how to problem solve. And now I am someone who could lose my car and my job and my apartment tomorrow, and I would still survive. Because I would know what to do. And lots of people, lots of young people today, not just people with disabilities, because I work in a college environment. Lots of young people today don't have those problem-solving coping skills. And, I think that's a mistake that a lot of people make lovingly. They don't want their child to have difficulties in life, but I think my parents made the right move because they let me make mistakes and they let me learn from those mistakes how to get up and do it right the next time.
Excellent point there.
I think all parents want their kids to be protected and want their kids to be safe and want their kids to be successful. But I really, really think that for me, what made me what I am and what gave me the strength and the skills that I have today is that my parents let me fall over and figure out how to get myself up. And that's an extremely valuable skill. So I want to get back, if we can, if there's no other questions, to sort of this plan that I developed partly out of research and partly out of working with students, but mostly out of my own personal experience. What we need is a strategy. We need a way to go about things. And so I developed this sort of very, very simple 5-step process to approaching tasks, to solving problems, to anticipating a new course or a new job or a new home. And it's really, really simple. And what it is this. The first step is to anticipate, to be able to think. To be able to think ahead and say, what is the next day and the next week likely to bring for me? Now, as a person with spina bifida, I know that we have, in addition to the cognitive kinds of things that we've been talking about today, we also have other kinds of issues that will, from time to time, get in our way. We have bladder and bowel issues. I will tell you that in the way of anticipating, step 1, I never go anywhere without a change of clothes. When I get in the car, I've got my briefcase, I'm going to work, I have a change of clothes in the briefcase. Always have, always will, because there will always be a situation that I need to deal with from time to time. So I have a change of clothes. The other piece of anticipation is anticipating things that are outside of my normal routine, because I have the routine down. I get in the car, I go to work, I know where work is, I know where my office is, I know what my day looks like, but there's always going to be something that's going to happen that's out of the ordinary. So I have to be able to think, what are the things that could possibly happen tomorrow, and how can I be prepared for them? And that's like, the anticipating step is difficult for us because just by our nature, it's against our nature. We just want to dive in. But we have to learn to be people who think about tomorrow and think about the next day. If I'm going to go for this job interview, or if I have to go down to the Department of Motor Vehicles to renew my license, what's that going to look like for me? How am I going to get there? Where is it? How long is it going to take me to get there? How much time is it going to take for me to do this? I have to be able to think in terms of not just living in the moment, but thinking about my plan for today, my plan for tomorrow, my plan for the next day. So that's the first thing, is to anticipate. The next thing is to make a plan. And my mother, right now, she's laughing because I've been telling people for the last several years, make a plan, and she said that over and over and over again, and I never liked it. I never liked to take time to write things down. I never liked to take time to write a to-do list or directions or remembrances. You know, the sticky notes are a marvelous thing, and planners and electronic calendars, PDAs, they're all wonderful things that I would have resisted until the day I die, until I got older and discovered that technology is our friend. So if you are a person that has difficulty with organizing and planning, or if you have a child that is going to have difficulty with organizing and planning, one of the best pieces of advice I can give to you is to look for ways to utilize technology and utilize planning tools. I have a lot of students that carry their entire schedule for their day and everything they need to do and everything they need to remember in their cell phone. And that's an extremely valuable thing for those of us that when we get up in the morning, the first thing I do in the morning is open up my email and look at my calendar. What's on my calendar for today? And it's a great thing. And I didn't used to do it, and I used to be the most disorganized person on the face of the earth. And now, I'm still a little disorganized, but in terms of work and in terms of school, I know what is expected of me on a daily basis, and that has helped me to do that. The other thing we have to do, and this is step 3, is to rehearse it, is to practice it. Do the thing. The other thing that I have done, and I was telling you about, you know, anticipating and planning the bowel and bladder issues, I have a change of clothes in my briefcase, but I also, wherever I am, I have planned an escape route. At my office every day, I know how to get from my office to my car with the least likelihood that I'm going to bump into people on my way. Because every now and then, something's going to happen, and I'm just going to need to leave. I'm going to walk out of the office, and I've actually told the people that work for me, you know, and I haven't told them a lot of details, but what I told them is there will come a time when I will walk out of my office and tell you that I'm leaving and I'll be back in a couple of hours. And that's it. That's all that needs to be said, and I have practiced that. I have left and gone down to the car and made sure that I didn't, you know, that I was able to get to the car without bumping into another person. So that's the step 4, execute your plan. Execute it, try it, because you know what? The best laid plans, you know what they say about the best laid plans? Something might go unexpectedly, something might go wrong, so we have to execute it, and then we have to sit down and say, did that work? And if it didn't work, how can I make it work the next time? Now, it would be nice if we could do this on our own, ourselves, and we can just sit down at the kitchen table at night and think and say, did that work? But we are social people, we are verbal people, we learn by talking things through. So in the evaluation stage, I always insist that we enlist the help of someone, a family member, a roommate, a friend, who we can sit down with and say, okay, this is what I decided to do about this, and I tried this, and this is how it went, and it didn't go as planned, and I need to think about whether or not there's a better way for me to do this. I have always found that we need someone as a sounding board. We need someone to bounce things off of and to say, this is my plan, what do you think of this? Or this is the plan that I executed and this is how it went down and this is what happened. How would you recommend that I move forward? Or do you have suggestions as to how I can do this better the next time? Make sense? Are there any questions at this point?
Actually, it's more of a comment. This is Dave again from Washington.
Hi.
And hi. And now, as far as your steps go, it's you're first thing anticipate and think about tomorrow. And this is something as a social worker, I see this on a daily basis. And of course, I've gone through this myself. But you know, even if I plan for tomorrow, you know, because I've got a very busy schedule. I try not to panic if things don't go the way that I anticipated. And I see people get so frustrated and get so panicky if things don't go, you know, the way that they wanted to, expected it to. So
absolutely. Absolutely.
And,
that's a really good thought because, David, you know, as you know and as I know, things rarely go exactly as we have foreseen them. And so part of that exercise in anticipating and planning is learning to be more mentally flexible. Anticipating and planning, but also being able to adapt. And adapting is a key word because the day is the day is the day, and things are going to happen, and things are going to go on that I wasn't thinking of. But instead of having a meltdown and crashing and saying I can't do this because it didn't, you know, it wasn't what I expected, one of the things that happens, at least it happened to me as I engaged in this process, is that I became more mentally flexible. If I anticipate and plan and rehearse and go through this process, oftentimes what happens is I become more able to cope with change. Because one of the key indicators of this nonverbal learning disability is I can have a set routine and I can execute it, but I go absolutely bananas when something out of the ordinary occurs. And so part of this anticipating is that thinking about, what if this happened? Or what if that were to happen? What would I do? And that engages me in the process of developing coping skills.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And another thing that I was going to, definitely, yeah. Another thing I was going to mention as far as making the, like a list, I mean, I have a smartphone. I use my phone as my agenda every single day. And as far as a calendar, I mean, it's even to the point where I mark down if I took my meds. You know, as soon as I take my meds, I'll set my alarm for taking my meds, and then as soon as I take my meds, I'll put down on my memo or on my phone that, okay, I took my meds at 6:45 a.m.
Yep.
Otherwise, I'm going to get to my other job, and I'm going to be like, oh, my gosh, did I forget to take them?
Exactly. Exactly.
So.
Check, done. Checklist, to-do list that you actually physically check off, whether it's with a pencil or on your phone, is a great thing. Because, you know, there are things in our lives that, and I think that's part of what all this is about, is that there are things in our lives that we cannot control. Those things that, you know, those traffic jams, those unanticipated, there are things that we cannot control. But those things that we can control, we should go out of our way to make sure that we have control of those things. Yeah. You know, it's the medications, it's the change of clothes, it's leaving early because I never know how long it's going to take me to get to work if there's a traffic jam. You know, those things that we can control, we've got to take charge and we've got to do that. But we also have to develop that mental flexibility to be able to say, to handle the what-ifs. Because it's the what-ifs that will stymie somebody with a nonverbal learning disability unless they have practiced what to do when things go awry.
And this is Sharon, and we are close to about 8:25, maybe about 8:27. So it might be a good time if anybody didn't if anyone has a burning question that they want to ask Julie before we begin to wrap it up a little bit. Now,
Julie, this is Brian.
I did first. I think it was a man's voice at first.
Yeah, Julie, this is Brian.
Hi, Brian.
Dallas. Hey, back you were talking about escape route. You know, from like your job or whatever. How is that possible if you work like in say a grocery store or a supermarket and you're the first person everybody sees when they walk in the door?
That's really challenging.
Yeah.
That's really challenging. But I'll tell you, Brian, you know what you need? You need an ally. You need one person on the job that you can share your intimate stuff with. That you can say, listen, once in a while, this thing might happen to me, and I need you to help me. So what I would encourage you to do is to find that one person on the job that you can have a conversation with to say, one day I might need you to rescue me, and this is why. You think that might be doable?
Yeah. Only problem with that is anybody we try to talk to, our boss is a big pain in the butt.
Yeah.
So
well,
it's kind of hard to talk to.
Yeah, I mean, you've got a tough situation because you're in front of the public.
Yeah.
You know, but what you can do is manage the situation as best you can. on a daily basis, do all the things that you need to be doing to manage that, but also try to find one person in that environment that you can trust, that you can sit down and talk to them and say, I might need you to rescue me, and this is why.
Okay.
And I think I also heard a woman's voice.
Yes. I have a question also.
Okay.
I don't work. I'm a stay-at-home mother.
Mm-hmm.
And my husband is not very easy to talk to about certain things, like if I needed help with something. And by the time he gets it in his head that I need assistance, like with the bathroom and things, I've already had a huge accident. And then he wants to pick at me and make fun. And I have trouble coping with being made fun of constantly and picked at constantly. It seems like I'm living my childhood all over again.
Mm-hmm.
And you wouldn't think that you would have that with a spouse. And I don't know how to handle that situation. I've explained to him many times that I am a verbal person and I speak from my heart and I wear my heart on my sleeve. And he doesn't get it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm having coping skills with that.
Yeah. Do you have now you're married, so do you have children?
Yes, I have one.
You have one child. Do you have other family in the general area, or what is your support system outside of your marriage?
Well, I have a lady that helps take care of me when my husband is at work. And that goes really well. But if it's left up to my husband, I'm stuck.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And that's not right. And
this is a really difficult. This is a really, really difficult situation, and I'm certainly I'm not a qualified counselor, but I can say that I've had relationships with people where this was a challenge, and you have to make some decisions about what you need in your life in terms of support, and you have to get some help with someone who can sit down with you and your husband and talk this through.
Right.
That would be, that's the best advice that I can give you, is to seek someone outside who's a professional counselor who you and your husband can sit down with, and you can talk through all of these things with their assistance.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else? Okay. Sharon, you're on.
Yes. Well, I want to thank everybody. I think this was an excellent program tonight, and I have been taking a few notes, and I know that we would be able to, perhaps I will get together with Carmen as to where we might post those notes or send them, and we will work on that idea. And I want to invite everyone on the call to our next teleprogram that would be July the 11th. So mark that on your calendars also. And Julie, much obliged that you were able to fit this into your schedule tonight. I know everyone is a little bit crammed with coming from the Guatemalan International Conference on to California this next week for the National Spina Bifida Conference, of which we're all looking forward to that, to learning a lot at those workshops also. So, Julie, much obliged, as I'm sure our audience is tonight. So thank you very much, folks, for dialing in, and also Julie for being so gracious about this.
Oh, no problem. And listen, for Sharon and Carmen, if there is anybody who's on the call who contacts anybody later, I'm more than happy to share my contact information, my email address. If anybody wants to communicate further, I'm happy to do so.
Okay, excellent.
Thank you very much, Julie. Thank you. Excellent.
Good. Thank you. And
You're welcome.
we will. Yes. Okay, folks. Good night, and we'll see you July the 7th, and we'll be sending out a little notice about that also. And if there's any questions, you can email Carmen or myself at SharonSellet@AOL.com. So we will see you all in July. Thank you so much.
Log in at 7:30 Eastern Time.
Eastern Time, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time.
Thank you all very much for your time tonight.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Thank you.